It was a man named Gress that started the zoo with a bunch of circus animals.
That's right. Yeah. So George Gress brought the circus to town and he broke down.
And he couldn't feed the animals.
He's going to donate it to the city of Atlanta for Grant Park, right? And city of Atlanta's like, thanks. What do we do with this?
Yeah.
But the people were very excited about it, because it had an elephant in it. It had a tiger and all these fun things. Atlanta really ultimately turned it into a zoo, and that's how it started.
Welcome, everybody, to ATL All Things Local. I'm your host, Jeffy, and I'm here with my co-host, Mincey.
What's up, guys? We have a fun episode in store. If you live here in Atlanta, chances are you've visited Grant Park because you've either gone to the zoo, you've gone to Cyclorama, or it's just a very large park.
It is a big park.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it today. There's lots of history behind the name Grant. There's Grant Street, obviously the neighborhood, but the namesake of it is, I think, where we'll probably start.
Yeah, I think we're going to start with a little bit of history of Grant Park, which is a park and a neighborhood. And we cover neighborhoods here, but this neighborhood is centered around the actual park. And as Mincey mentioned, there's a lot of stuff there at the park, and it's changed over the decades. There used to be a lake at Grant Park.
Yeah, obviously the zoo and the start of the zoo, which was a broken down circus and all types of really fun little tidbits about the area that I didn't even know.
Well, it was started. Tell us about how it began.
Well, really, Lemuel P. Grant, or LP Grant, which is what I'll call him because Lemuel.
We don't know how to pronounce Lemuel.
Yeah, it's just a weird pronunciation. I think of Samuel, but Lemuel P. Grant. He moved to Atlanta before Atlanta was even Atlanta, right? It was before Atlanta was even named Marthasville. So he had been here around 1840. He joined the Railroad Corps of Engineers and really had a big hand in...
Is the corps the same as the Corps?
I guess so. He had a big hand in making the railroad go into Atlanta and the heart of Atlanta to where it is today. And he did move here and acquire quite a bit of land.
600 acres.
600 acres.
For $1,200.
Yeah, about $2 an acre. And at that time, they were just pretty much giving out land. But he was very lucky to get all of that land. And
well, the interesting thing I think about LP Grant is that he was born in 1817, got an education as an engineer, moved south in 1840, and within about 15 years finds himself in the middle of this Civil War.
Yeah.
That's part of when I think about people back then or look at, even things that happened, like the development of Grant Park as a neighborhood starting in the 1880s. I'm like, that's so close to a truly devastating, war in multiple ways, but to the city of Atlanta being burned down and stuff like that. That's an amazing amount of recovery. And I know it happens all over the place, but I'm always astounded at, after some great tragedy like that, how quickly humans kind of bounce back and rebuild and all of that. And I guess that's part of the Phoenix
right.
resurgence and Phoenix rising from the ashes and all of that stuff.
Right.
And, to see where Atlanta's come since then is pretty great.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that we lose with a lot of that is that Atlanta feels like this very young, new city. And there are only, how many antebellum mansions left now?
Well, technically there are 3 left. And when Jeff says the Phoenix, that is our mascot and kind of our slogan is rising from the ashes because of, Atlanta's been burned to the ground a couple times. And we talk about that in a couple of our episodes because it's pretty important information when we're talking.
Has it been burned down more than once?
Well, you've got the Great Fire.
The Great Fire.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then, after Sherman's March, there were only about 400 homes that were left. And then 3 of those are still standing today, as far as we know. And one of those was LP Grant's house.
Which has an interesting story behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it originally, Sherman ultimately saved it because apparently there was a Masonic flag that was found in the attic, and Sherman's mom said, you can't touch any house that's got any sort of Catholic or Masonic memorabilia in it. And so he listened to his mom like all good boys do, I guess. I say good boy as he's burning a city down. But ultimately, he did preserved that house. Today, originally it was a 3-story massive mansion. Not quite the same today. Atlanta's today it is home to Atlanta Preservation Center, which is a nonprofit organization focused on preserving Atlanta's historical structures, architecture, and landscapes through education, advocacy for. They do a lot of walking tours and things like that. But it's not only a beautiful house, it's also a staple for just what Grant Park is and its namesake and all of that. Well, we got Grant Park because ultimately LP Grant donated at least 100 acres, right? Or 100, I guess 44 after.
That was the expansion. And I think the 44 expansion was when the who are the landscape architects that did Piedmont Park and Central Park and all of that?
Well, Olmsted, the sons of Olmsted were originally the developers for Grant Park, and originally was modeled after Central Park in New York, right?
Is that the same for Piedmont Park?
Yes. Well, that's the story, is that it's the same. But
which brings up an interesting question. We hear all these stories like, hey, Piedmont Park was designed by the same people that did Central Park, and it's supposed to be the same. I don't know if that's true or not.
I mean, that's just the story,
That's right.
I guess that would be our job on this podcast, to tell the truth on
everything we say is true.
That's right. But ultimately, it had a lot of rock bridges and similar things that you would see in Central Park. It doesn't really exist today in the same way. And you mentioned earlier that there was a lake in the middle of Grant Park. And it's kind of funny because a lot of people don't really mention, the kind of story that we hear is that the lake was turned into a parking lot because Grant Park Zoo needed more parking. But it kind of ties up with when segregation was a pretty big thing. The park has always been non-segregated, and the zoo and Cyclorama, that's not necessarily the case, but the park was deeded by LP Grant to be unsegregated, and that would include the lake. Now, when segregation became so popular, or when segregation was a big issue here in Atlanta, lake, the city of Atlanta just didn't really want to deal with, is mainly, I think, what happened. And they decided to turn it into a parking lot.
That sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looked really cool. The old not photographs really, but the paintings and everything of people swimming and having little boats. And there's not really a place like that.
No, you could
rent a
really
little cool.
Yeah, you could rent a paddle boat, take it out. I mean, could you imagine if Grant Park had a lake? That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Piedmont Park has a pond.
It does.
But
yeah, it kind of feels like what I would imagine. The Piedmont Park pond/lake kind of feels like what I think the Grant Park one felt like. But even that one at Piedmont Park, you don't see anybody swimming in there.
No.
You see some really dirty ducks hanging around.
Very dirty ducks.
Yeah. I guess lakes in the center of a city aren't always great ideas. It's just sad for the reasons that one went away. And it could have at least been nice to look at, even if they didn't let people swim in it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one thing you mentioned, too, was the Civil War. And the Civil War and the Battle of Atlanta, very prominent in Grant Park. LP Grant was hired by the city to be a lead engineer to design all these defense fortifications around Atlanta. And these were massive trenches, right? And they were built all the way around Atlanta.
Like 16 miles, I think.
Yeah. And that's digging trenches. That's huge. And one piece of it that you brought to light is ultimately named Fort Walker. Tell us a little bit about, there's some cannons that are pointed towards one another.
Yeah, I learned about this when I did a walking tour of Grant Park. I can't remember the organization that did it, but it was really, I like doing walking tours of towns. And we stood there in the southeast corner of Grant Park, and there are these slight hills, and it is kind of an overlook area of the park. I think that's the highest ground around there. And engineer Grant developed this fortification that was part of the 16 miles of kind of fortifications around town. And the idea was that they would put artillery there that could protect the city of Atlanta from the Union forces, particularly their artillery. What Grant didn't know is that the Union artillery was big enough that they could stay out of range of any of the Confederate artillery and still shell Atlanta. So all that preparation and all that work, and they realized, well, the Union forces are just going to hang back out of gunshot and just shell the city, which kind of sucks. You kind of get ready, you build all this stuff up, and then it's not even able to be used.
I guess that's what happens when you study engineering and not war.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, being an engineer, he knew how to do it, but maybe didn't know exactly where to do it.
Maybe should have gone to MIT instead.
Yeah. Or West Point.
Should have gone to West Point.
Should have gone to West Point.
Yeah.
Well, I actually think Robert E. Lee went to West Point, right? Isn't where all those guys went and met and knew each other?
Probably so. I think Walker went to MIT.
MIT. Well, that's good. So anyway, kind of interesting side note about how the war was a part of Grant Park. But is this a good time to talk about all the other land that Grant donated?
Yeah.
Donated a lot of land for parks and cemeteries.
That's right. Yeah.
The Westview Cemetery, massive cemetery on the west side of town. Historic cemetery of Oakland Cemetery, which used to be called Atlanta Cemetery. I'm not sure why it was called Atlanta Cemetery and then changed to another city's name. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No, it doesn't. I mean, it was namesake, I'm sure.
Now everybody knows it as Oakland Cemetery. Fantastic place for history buffs to go. And interestingly, you'll find the mausoleum for Margaret Mitchell, among other famous Atlantans there. And Margaret Mitchell is kind of tied into this LP Grant mansion.
That's right. She owned it for quite a while. And until she died, she owned it.
And some of the history stuff we talk about, it's like, were there only 5 people in the town? They always seem to overlap and own each other's stuff and sue each other and all that. So
yeah,
the fact that, Atlanta wasn't just 5 people, it was thousands of people. And these two, cross paths significantly.
They do. And she owned it. She had rented it, because obviously the Margaret Mitchell house is popular in Midtown. But this house that she owned, LP Grant, she bought because she knew the historic significance of it, and she rented it, and the tenant let it go to disarray, and she ended up having to go to court and fight that, and ultimately lost in court. And then the Atlanta Preservation Center opened there and took it. It's not what it once was, but it is still got some of the exposed openings that you can see the traditional construction, because construction was very different back then, and so it's fun to see some of the brick, and it had a ton of fireplaces. I think it at one point was the first LP Grant had the first piano in the Southeast in America in the home, and that was like something that was pretty odd to me, just that was the first piano ever in the Southeast.
I'm finding that hard to believe.
Right?
And it wouldn't be the first piano in the Southeast.
I believe so.
Maybe the first one in a residence?
Maybe. Yeah, I think that might be right. Well, we'll see.
You history buffs, let us know.
Yeah.
A couple other things about Grant is that he had a vision for Atlanta being a transportation hub, which is interesting because I-20 now goes right by Grant Park, which we'll talk more about that. He was also a big advocate for public education, and a lot of what he did is of historical significance, for us in the city.
Yeah, and most people at the time usually have some sort of clout over their name, but LP Grant was overall just a pretty good guy, it seems like, and had a relatively good philanthropy style life.
Well, I did notice somewhere that it said that these fortifications for the war were built by enslaved labor.
Well, if it was that for the war, that would be when slavery was.
Yeah, still a thing. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the development of the neighborhood. I think we have the park, but it seems that everything we've seen, the neighborhood didn't really start coming together until a couple decades after the end of the war.
That's right. So LP Grant's land was subdivided in the 1880s. It featured narrow lots with alleyways, and alleyways were often a thing here in Atlanta because if you think back to the 1880s, bathrooms were not inside, they were outhouses.
Mm-hmm.
And so the sewage wagons had to come and clean out your outhouse. And how they did that was they would go through these alleyways. Still today, in
And
many,
they would bring coal and all kinds of other things.
yeah, and still to this day, you'll notice in older neighborhoods in Atlanta there are these alleyways. There are large Victorian homes. Most of those homes face the park. They're close to the park. The larger homes are. They were probably some of the first built and established around the neighborhood. And then you've got obviously the 1900s to 1920s craftsmen's sprinkled throughout. You'll oftentimes find several homes were built from the 1900s to the 1920s. Those are going to be your more craftsman style bungalows. Many of those in Grant Park, you'll hear the term folk Victorians. They actually look like a craftsman home, but they have some unique features like gingerbread,
Spindle work.
spindle work, exactly, that have a little bit of that Queen Anne or Victorian features to them on the exterior.
Mm-hmm.
Not exactly sure who came up with that name or which homes are that, but generally speaking, the homeowners there will kind of stick to those terms. So if you ever see that, just know it means that it's a craftsman home with some unique Victorian features.
That's great. When did people really start moving en masse to Grant Park? Do you think it was the late 19th century?
Yes. I mean, there was. And then obviously Grant Park grew. And after I-20 was built, there was a large segregation to Grant Park. But Grant Park has always been a pretty sought after neighborhood in my eyes. I mean, it's always had relatively sizable homes, and it's done pretty well. It's still today one of the most sought after neighborhoods in town that you would want to live in.
Mm-hmm.
There was obviously a large revitalization in 1980s on to today. I-20 did cut Grant Park in half.
Did it?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess south of Memorial, that
Well, a third
strip.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up in Atlanta in the 80s, the big thing about Grant Park was the fact that the Atlanta Zoo, which had a horrible reputation, like animals dying, just completely unkept, and nobody wanted to go there. It had a huge revitalization. And I remember people starting to go back to the zoo, and it got a lot of notoriety and got some pandas loaned from China and really became a big thing. And over the decades, then they added the building that looks like a big snake. I think that's the Savannah exhibit and other things. And I think, Grant Park is very similar to what it looked like, in the 80s. It's just that the zoo is different. Now there's a big parking deck there. I think that's for the zoo, or is that for the Grant Park in general?
I think both. I think the idea was that they built that additional building that they were going to house a restaurant or something in, but it really became more of a public space. I think there is a tenant there now that's planning on doing a build out for it, but and then they redid the upper turf there to make a little bit more of a park, but it is probably more for the zoo than anything else.
It seems like as we do more of these things, it just feels like there are more and more racial boundaries in the history of Atlanta. We've got, interstates creating like land moats, but, all the street names change when they cross ponds. And now we're hearing that, kind of south of I-20, was a racial segregation kind of when after segregation was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just many stories around Atlanta about different ways that the city was split up, either intentionally or just by default through people's actions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we talked about the lake too being an issue. Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the zoo and how it originated.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
So tell us a little bit about. I
learned something in preparing for this. My understanding was that the zoo started when Asa Candler Jr. had this. Coca-Cola founder's son, one of his sons, had a private zoo on Briarcliff Road, which is now part of Emory University.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the orangutans got out, chased a pregnant woman that lived close by into her home. She was fine, but she fell going up the steps. And maybe she wasn't fine. She wasn't killed by the orangutan.
I heard the orangutan ate like money out of her purse or something.
I'm sure we could come up with all kinds of good stories from that one. Yeah, but who knows? But there was a big lawsuit. Part of the settlement was that the Candler son needed to get rid of his animals. I thought he donated them to the city.
Which maybe he did. Maybe he did. I thought he got money for it, but maybe he did.
There's some question about the financial piece. But what I learned in doing this was that he didn't start the zoo with that donation or sale. It was a man named Gress that started the zoo with a bunch of circus animals.
That's right. Yeah. So George Gress brought the circus to town, and he broke down.
And he couldn't feed the animals.
He couldn't feed the animals, but he was ultimately selling the full zoo or the full circus. He was selling the full circus, and that included train parts. And the original purchaser for this was mostly interested in the train parts, but was like, okay, whatever, I'll take,
I'll take some giraffes and elephants and all that.
I'll take that with it. Yeah. And he's going to donate it to the city of Atlanta for Grant Park, right? And city of Atlanta's like, thanks. What do we do with this?
Yeah.
But the people were very excited about it. Because it did have an elephant in it, and, it had a tiger and all these fun things that Atlanta really ultimately turned it into a zoo, and that's how it started. And then Asa Candler Jr.'s donation of his wild animals that he did not take care of or tame very well included 6 or 7 elephants, and their names were like Coca, Cola, Paws, Refreshing something or another.
You joking?
No, they were all like Coca-Cola themed named.
Wow.
And he donated them. And so it's
One
just
was called The Real Thing.
The real, yeah. And it's just it's a fun little, unique story. Like really, you can't make this stuff up. But the zoo is still there. It's still a very busy piece of Atlanta.
I wonder if like when the guy got the train parts, and then he had the animals, did he just let them run free? Like, I don't want these animals? Or
they had to be in.
Was there a time in Atlanta's history where there were giraffes running down the streets?
Well, there's apparently, was it a chimpanzee that got out of the zoo at some point in like the late 90s, early 2000s at Grant Park, and it was like running around
I didn't know about
the
that.
neighborhood. Yeah, I mean, again, stories. We don't know. But apparently, if you live close enough to the zoo, too, you can hear, like, lions roar, and animals sometimes at night.
I did hear a woman talking about raising her family in Grant Park in late part of the 20th century, and a huge python got out. And she couldn't let her pets out or anything and was really concerned until they tracked the snake down. Which, that would be pretty scary.
That would be very scary. Yeah. That sounds like something we would experience in Florida, but not Atlanta.
So I guess if you live near a zoo or a prison, things might get out.
Yes, there is always that risk.
Yeah. People, animals, whatever. Something might come popping out.
That's true. Okay, so let's bring it into modern day Grant Park. And today, Grant Park is like where all my friends live, have lived, or want to live. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think as much as I-20 might have been a racial segregation kind of boundary of some sort, it's also super freaking convenient.
It is, yeah.
Because you can go from Grant Park to the Capitol downtown in under 5 minutes.
Yeah, or you can go to East Atlanta or Edgewood or any of these other neighborhoods that we talk about here very quickly.
Yeah.
You're also in Boulevard, Memorial, Glenwood.
Mm-hmm.
You're close to the high school that your kids would go to if you were in Manor-Jackson District. You're in Parkside Elementary School there, which is a pretty
You've got tons of outdoor
space.
space, namely the park. It's right in the middle of the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. And then you've got really somewhat affordable historic homes.
Mm-hmm.
And we say affordable in today's day and age. You could get a 1,500 to 2,000 square foot Craftsman for 600 to 900 up to $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard to find in Atlanta, especially in other neighborhoods.
That kind of proximity to downtown and other attractions.
Yeah, yeah, because the other side you'd be in Candler Park or you'd be in Decatur, and those would be more expensive.
When I was a young man, I watched my friends buy $120,000 bungalows in Grant Park, and I was like, how can you afford that?
Yeah. Inflation's a mother.
Technical term.
Technical term.
What about buying a home in Grant Park for less than $600,000? I guess you would need to go with the townhouse or condo, something like that.
Well, there's plenty of small homes in Grant Park.
Mhm.
You know, if you're looking for, if a 2-bedroom is a good fit for you, you can get a 2-bedroom in the 400s up to 500 range, right? Low fives.
In a detached house? Or?
Yeah. And you could be close to the Beltline. You know, the thing is, there's a couple main thoroughfares, Boulevard being one. They don't necessarily want to be off of or that close to, but it's convenient. And Grant Park doesn't have a commercial district. That's one thing that is important to note, is it's mostly neighborhood. It didn't really ever have like a downtown, so you'll see like scattered commercial buildings here and there, right? So you've got like where Dakota Blue is and Grant Park Market, which used to be, I believe, Kelly's, which was the old grocery and the longest independent grocery store in Atlanta for many years. And then you've also got new developments that house Little Tart Bake Shop and Ria's Bluebird and
Well, the whole Memorial Corridor.
which has really grown. Yeah, and then Taco Town is another little segment of Grant Park that's got smaller homes that kind of butts up to Memorial and Reynolds Town and Cabbage Town.
Mm-hmm.
But then on the other side, when you get closer to the park, you have really sparse developments. You know, you've got the tattoo shop and
You've got a couple of those little spots right on Cherokee, south of I-20, that seemed like they would have been kind of the neighborhoods, and they still are the neighborhood spots, but it's certainly not enough commercial area to support the entire neighborhood.
right.
So I think that's why we've seen all these places pop up on Memorial or East Atlanta Village.
Yeah.
You can get to all of your fast food things within about 5 minutes if you just head east over to East Atlanta.
Yeah, and one of the brilliant developments that has really helped Grant Park is Summerhill development on Georgia Avenue, very close to it. You also have the Beacon, which is South Grant Park again. I am not the biggest fan of the Beacon. To me, it's not really been where I would love to go. I much more prefer going to Georgia Avenue and Summerhill. I will say,
But the Beacon is right on the Beltline.
it is right on the Beltline. Yes. I will say one of my favorite things about the neighborhood of Grant Park is it has my favorite farmers market.
Oh, that's a big deal, actually.
The Sunday farmers market in Grant Park, where to be. You know, if it's Sunday morning, if you want to go experience Atlanta, go to Grant Park's farmers market.
Is it year-round?
They do have a year-round market. Yes, they do. It is much more vibrant in the spring to fall.
Mm-hmm.
They do kind of a pared down winter market,
Mm-hmm.
but they still do have the winter market. But the cool thing about Grant Park is it's not just the Swiss chard that you're going to get there. It's about, they've got really good vendors who are selling ready food. They also have live music, and they have just a really good vibe overall at that market.
I'll have to check it out.
You've never been?
Never been.
You've never been to Grant Park's farmers market?
I like to stay home on the weekends. On
Oh,
the mornings.
wow.
I sleep in.
Sundays, you got to get out there.
Well, we would love to talk about Grant Park with any of you. If you have any insight on the things we missed or got wrong, we'd love more stories about the history of the town, because it seems like a lot of them are stories, and sometimes it's hard to fact check them, but that's what we got.
Absolutely. And if you're interested in moving to Grant Park, we know, love, and appreciate that neighborhood. So feel free to reach out to us with any questions. And if you have any follow-up needs for a home loan, mortgage, anything like that, Jeffy is your go-to lender. And we appreciate you listening, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.